Hi, I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime magazine. I'm here today with Jason Lau, Chief Information Security Officer at Crypto.com. With over 2,600 people in offices across the Americas, Europe, and Asia, Crypto.com is accelerating the world's transition to cryptocurrency. To learn more about Crypto.com, visit Crypto.com. This interview is sponsored by KnowBe4, the world's largest security awareness training and simulated phishing platform that helps you manage the ongoing problem of social engineering. To learn more about KnowBe4, visit knowbe4.com. Jason, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Jason, you have a great background. Before we jump in today, maybe just give our audience a 30,000-foot view on your background in the industry.
Sure. So I've been in the cyberspace for almost 25 years now. I've done a variety of different roles from Microsoft consulting through to where I am at the moment, where I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Crypto.com, where I handle the global cybersecurity strategy and data privacy strategy.
So it must be exciting to work for a company that has a stadium named after them. I saw that in the news after you and I had an exchange before agreeing to bring you on.
Sure. So I don't know if it's exciting is the right word. It's absolutely exciting, but it also puts a pretty big target on our head. So by all means, it's one of the biggest things that you can think about. Staples Center is just a big name that is synonymous with sports. Some of the biggest entertainment things that have ever happened in that building, and now it's Crypto.com Arena. So definitely a big thing for our brand as well. Also, Matt Damon's part of the face of our company as well. So that those two things together, you can just imagine the amount of press and coverage that we've been getting recently.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's good for our industry. I think it's good for crypto. I think it's good for security, for more people to pay attention and maybe indirectly raises awareness. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. We recently published our top 5 cyber economic statistics, which helps raise awareness and frame global spending on cybersecurity, cybercrime damage costs. So I wanted to ask you some questions, get your view as a CISO. We've been meeting with CISOs globally and discussing this with them. So let's jump in. The first statistic, if it was measured as a country, cybercrime damages would total $6 trillion globally in 2021, which would make it the 3rd largest economy behind the US and China. And we're looking at that growing about 15% year over year. The damages will reach 10.5 trillion by 2025, and that's up from about 3 trillion in 2015, just to give you an idea of the growth. Are these figures, in your opinion, Jason, overinflated? Is cybercrime really causing that much damage to the world?
Sure. So I think a lot of these statistics, there's different ways to look at it. So more than likely, these statistics also don't take into account nation-state attacks on each other. So if you had to take into account the impact and the cost different countries are having to pay in regards to solidifying their own network, the figures would probably be significantly higher. So I think this, it's literally every day you're seeing news about new hacks, whether it's a few weeks ago it's GoDaddy or some small DNA testing company today being exposed to 2 point something million data subjects being leaked. It just happens across a broad spectrum of industries, and absolutely, I think these numbers are not overestimated. So maybe I can just give a little bit of insight specifically in my field, just to give a little bit of a taste of why it's not overinflated. I mean, if you just look at some of the statistics from some other reports, there have been around more than 30 different cyber attacks, specifically in the crypto space, over the last few months, just in the year of 2021, and the total value of all of these come to around $3 billion US. So we're on target to be breaking the previous record, which was last year in the crypto space, where there was only around 37, 38 or so cases. So every single year, these new crypto cases are becoming more and more of an issue. And if you go back in time to around, I think it was 2017 or so, the Mt. Gox attack, that was around 600 million just for one company. So we're definitely seeing a massive challenge in this space. But one new industry in the fintech space, crypto space, is about decentralized finance. So when you see some of these crypto hacks, just specifically in 2021, over 75% of these attacks have been in the DeFi space. When you look at some of the statistics and some of the companies, some of the biggest networks like Poly Network had 600 million sifted out from them in an attack, of which a bulk of it was returned by the nice hacker, if you want to call it a nice hacker. Yeah, so I mean, just these numbers, and you can clearly see that I personally don't feel that it's overinflated at all.
So we've been tracking hacks and data breaches in the DeFi space, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. Not everyone's paying attention to it. I'm curious,
Sure.
do you think there are a lot of attacks in that space that are not being reported that we don't know about?
Possible, but I think in the decentralized world where almost everybody has a lot more transparency into this DeFi space, it's a lot harder to hide, if you know what I mean. So almost everybody is a participant now in this whole decentralized space. So if there was an attack, it would have material impact on not just one particular company, but on a network and a network of many people. And therefore, a network of many people is just going to have cascading effects because certain networks or certain programs or applications or projects are built on certain types of protocols on blockchains, and therefore it's just a cascading effect. So it'll be harder than if it was a publicly listed, a private company trying to kind of hide it for a little bit longer. In the decentralized finance space, news spreads pretty fast.
Right. So, that has us, looking at spending. Are we
Sure.
as a society globally, are we as organizations spending enough money on cybersecurity to combat cybercrime? We track this, going all the way back to 2004. This was a very small market. The cybersecurity market was maybe $3 to $4 billion. And for the 5-year period, we tracked that from 2017 to 2021. We were looking at a market exceeding $1 trillion for the next 5 years. 15% growth year over year. That's our estimation. We're looking at about 1.75 trillion. So I don't know which question I should really be asking you, Jason. Is the world really spending, that much, or are we spending enough?
Well, the dates that you had mentioned all the way back to that time, it was probably a little bit after the dot-com phase, and cybersecurity wasn't really a hot topic back then. It wasn't really a big name. Data privacy was also not a big thing back then. And cybersecurity is more called information security or information systems or log monitoring, basically. And in those days, it was more of a function. It's more of a something within the IT department that kind of needed to be done. But more and more as we've evolved between that period to now, many companies now are obviously going to digital transformation and realizing that the on-premise network is no longer where your entire data is or your infrastructure is now much more diversely spread out in a hybrid space. So you've got cloud, you've got IoT, you've got all sorts of things, and people working from home as well. So I think when this is happening, it means that these new technologies are going to provide or give rise to new vulnerabilities and new threats and new risks. And therefore, that's going to give rise to new areas of gaps, which then gives rise to the controls that need to be put in place from a cybersecurity perspective to harden these gaps. So in my opinion, I think it's by simply the evolution of how technology is just growing so fast, keeping up from a cybersecurity perspective is always going to be a challenge. So we're seeing all of these new things from zero trust model through defense in depth through to identity-driven security, and all of these methodologies or frameworks that you want to call them require a significant amount of investment as well as a lot of accountability, and that means more people, more infrastructure, more tools, etc. So in my personal opinion, from working in different companies, etc., I feel that there definitely needs to be more investment in cybersecurity for sure.
So we started off talking about the stadium, and I want to go back to that with a statistic. Right now, we've got approximately 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity positions globally. That would fill that stadium 50 times, just to give people a
Sure.
visual. There's not enough of you. There's not enough, of Jason to go around. We don't have enough CISOs. Companies are struggling. People who are reporting up to you, cybersecurity teams, we're seeing more and more CISOs looking for cooperation from IT teams, trying to cross people over. We're trying to get more women involved in the field. We're trying to reach out to young people, minorities. But still, that labor gap persists. What's your view? And I'm also curious about, your part of the world, whether you want to speak to Singapore or Asia Pac more broadly. Are you seeing the same things that we are?
Sure. So I think on top of that, you had mentioned there's not enough of others like myself. I think it's also one thing to point out that there's also a very common term in the industry talking about the CISO burnout. So in the field that we're in, cybercrime, cybersecurity being almost like a 24/7 type of focus, and always being on your toes, that burnout means that there's also a flow of people that are just they just can't stay in those roles for too long. So that's another kind of dynamic that we need to take into consideration. But going back to your point, in regards to the football field and the cybersecurity shortage, I think we also need to take a different look at this. I've seen lots of statistics on this as well, from IC Squared and everybody about the global shortage. I think one aspect of this is cybersecurity jobs are not just jobs that have some sort of information security title in the actual name. Now, I think what's really, I think the statistics are probably a much greater shortage, if you ask me, because when you look at it, you should also be thinking about other titles that may not necessarily be pure cybersecurity, but still deal with a lot of cybersecurity related type of issues. So the biggest trend now we're seeing what are called data privacy technologists. We're seeing that this particular role needs to bridge between cybersecurity and data privacy. The typical ISC certifications and also IPP certifications, or even ISACA has come up with a certification specifically looking at certifying privacy technologists to cater for that bridge between that privacy and cybersecurity side. And then you now have legal professionals that are specifically focusing into cybersecurity. So if you're simply looking at, the information security type guys, the threat analysts, the incident response guys, but then you're not also looking at these other new skills of cybersecurity that are needed, then the statistics clearly are not covering, everything, and there's probably many more football fields of what's actually needed, and that's just on the kind of compliance and the legal side. But then we're seeing more and more fraud and crime linking with cybersecurity as well. So the traditional areas of fraud links with, especially in our field in fintech, the whole cryptocurrency space, the fraud, the crime, it all links with cybersecurity as well. So there's really probably quite a few more football fields. And then to your comment in regards to our region, from a hiring perspective, we definitely are seeing a shortage. So for whatever type of role that I'm looking for, there's a shortage, whether it's in Singapore, Hong Kong, or even in the US. It's definitely not easy to find. So trying to find those with 5 years of experience is really tough. But looking for somebody with 5 years of blockchain security experience just doesn't exist.
Right.
So all of these, we're just in such a new market, right? So a lot of these new blockchain technologies have only just come up recently over the last few years. So a lot of the things that we need, we're basically inventing and training people in-house with a lot of these skill sets. So specifically in APAC, where fintech is a very big thing, there is a massive shortage. And in the crypto space, almost all of the major companies have a headquarters in Singapore or in APAC. So you can imagine that there's just a massive talent pool that people are trying to get to, but it's just hard to get.
So I want to ask you just about, one particular type of cybercrime. I could not get people to pay attention to me on this. Back in 2015, I was writing a lot about ransomware. And I felt like I was wearing myself out because it just wasn't something that was big enough. Maybe we're talking about damages several $100 million, and as you probably know, it's not until the problem gets big enough that people start to pay attention to it. Well, now it's absolutely big enough. It's almost 60 times greater than it was. We're looking at damages of about $20 billion related to ransomware globally. That's just this year. Our people, hopefully, and when I say people, CISO, cybersecurity teams, and maybe even the boards and C-suite executives paying more attention to this?
So I've also been advocating for a lot of awareness on this. When I was at Microsoft before, I was right in the middle of everything that was happening with WannaCry and NotPetya. And when, I won't mention the names, but, massive shipping container companies and other big companies getting hit by ransomware. I think that was the time when awareness became a little bit more public because of just the massive sheer scale of WannaCry and the impact that it had. After that point, companies started to pay a little bit more attention to the incident response and ransomware, and I still don't feel that there's enough awareness in this space. I definitely feel that there could be much more awareness on the potential risks and damages, but you keep drumming the same message. But unfortunately, because so many incidents happen, people are almost getting numb to the fact that there's news about this every day, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's almost to the point where in industry, everybody talks about the same cliche, which is it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. So for some companies, they realize that, look, I barely have enough budget to deal with these things. What's the risk or what's the probability of a ransomware attack? Maybe let's just deal with it when the time comes. So unfortunately, there is that issue. But we're seeing a lot of change. We're seeing that from supply chain attacks in industry are happening to Kaseya and 15,000. Was it 15,000 or 1,500 plus type of their customers got hit? But we're seeing I'm seeing in industry, because I participate in a lot of industry, different networks and associations, that ransomware is evolving. So the type of ransomware that maybe you were talking about many years ago is evolving, and the methods are evolving. So I've been writing about this as well in the RSA conferences, and we're seeing things like double extortion kind of happening. Right. And what does that mean? Well, it means it's not just about the traditional methods of the past, how we would see ransomware lock up your systems. You see a big black sign that says "Pay me X amount of dollars and we'll unlock." They're doing that, plus they're exfiltrating out the data, storing it somewhere so that they could potentially use it for something else at a different time.
Right.
So people are getting much smarter now because data is the new currency. And then on top of that, I wrote about a new method of ransomware, which is AI-powered malware. So you can just think about it in the future that there's going to be AI-powered ransomware type of things, and it just it's in your network, and then it basically just instead of attacking everybody, it's very targeted in knowing what it wants to do, and it releases its payload at the right time, at the right moment, at the right person. So I think that this is the evolution, and the scary evolution of kind of where it's going to go. And I think we're already starting to see this to some extent, because we're seeing kind of like a what do you want to call it? Kind of almost as if it's like an intermittent encryption type of ransomware, where it's bypassing the typical type of signatures of your tools that you would use to detect the typical type of malware by encrypting only partial parts of that packet or that package, if you want to call it that, which means that if it's slightly corrupted, then your detection software may not pick it up. And as a result, it kind of goes through your system, and then after that, then it could potentially be quite malicious in your network. So we're seeing so many different evolutions of this, and another one which is really scary is, of course, ransomware as a service.
Right.
So on the dark web, pay a little bit of money, and people can do these phishing campaigns for you or take down the site for you with DDoS. So unfortunately, not everybody is aware of all of these issues that are happening in the background.
Right. Well, that's something we can definitely bring you back on for, a whole nother conversation. AI-based malware is, it's fascinating, it's scary, and would like to definitely revisit that with you. So a little bit earlier, you were talking about, the movement to the cloud. I got an email from a CISO, and he just wanted to make sure that the figures we published were accurate, because he was going into a board meeting and he wanted to try to, break this down. We had put out a report estimating that the total amount of data that the world will store by 2025 is about 200 zettabytes. So how many zeros are in a zettabyte? And I don't have an analogy. I don't know if you have one or some picture for people to imagine just how vast that is. But we're also expecting that about 50% of that data in 5 years from now will be in the cloud. So we're definitely moving there. Is that good news? Is that more secure? Does it pose more challenges? What's your take on that?
So to your first point in regard to the zettabytes, I think the easiest analogy is to just ask everybody to look around their house, from everything from their Fitbit to a heart pacemaker through to their smart TV or whatever. Everything is pretty much connected nowadays. So your fridge, if it's smart enough, can tell you when you need to change your stuff in the fridge because it's not getting fresh. So it's really getting to the point where IoT, the Internet of Things, is just exploding. And on this particular point, one of the big risks with IoT is that there hasn't been a very standardized kind of protocol that everybody in the world is using as the baseline for IoT communications and technology. So I have seen some, for the internet, we've got the baselines of, TCP/IP, which was, not really secure, but it did what it needed to do, and everybody built layers of security on top. But for IoT, it's just still at its very early stage, but everybody's just building IoT devices already. And there's going to be security threats there. We've seen big companies and CCTV cameras being hacked because of this. And this data has to go somewhere. So when we look at the cloud, I think one way to look at this before just using the term cloud is to kind of break it down into kind of what it is. So when we look into the IoT side of things, we've got all these devices everywhere that's collecting data kind of locally. And then we can kind of consider another kind of fog layer, which is kind of at the edge of the cloud, but not quite at the cloud. And these fog servers are kind of like, doing the remote processing locally, communicating back to the, IoT devices. That way it's nice and quick and fast and effective. And then at a predetermined period of time, those kind of fog layer servers would send data back to the cloud layer data centers for processing big data or storage or whatnot. So when you look at these three layers, you can just imagine that there's going to be a significant amount of security risks on each of these layers, whether it's at the cloud layer, the backup, the disaster recovery, and the scaling, the hyperscaling. Then on the fog layer, how does the communication work? Is it secure? And a lot of these systems and servers could be, again, in certain areas of the cloud, in certain jurisdictions, but not in other jurisdictions. And then you've got cross-border data transfer issues and security concerns with that. So there's a huge amount of security that needs to be considered when you are looking at the whole kind of spectrum of IoT through to its, it's not just that Fitbit device. You need to really look at the whole, life cycle of that particular device and its data. And as a result of that, absolutely, if you had to follow the carbon footprint of the data from your Fitbit that's gathering from your body through to where it's actually being stored, that'll be another call for us to discuss. So going back to your point, I think there's still a lot of area of improvement in this space for sure. By no means am I an expert in the IoT space, but I definitely think that from there needs to be at least some sort of global standardization in regards to protocol before we can slowly start building layers and layers on top.
So, Jason, we covered a lot of ground. We talked about cybercrime and cybersecurity. We talked about technology and data. We talked about IT teams and cybersecurity teams and CISOs. I want to close out talking to you about employees. At this point, I don't think there's any question that most companies, I hope, or at least let's just say most large companies, have a security awareness training program, phishing simulation program. But my question for you is just how important is that? When you think about cybersecurity in the grand scheme of things, you've got so much on your plate as a CISO that you have to deal with. How important is it to train the employees?
That's absolutely critical. It's not common, but I've got a dedicated team that focuses on the human element of security. So it's not just about having endpoint identity and access management technical controls. You got to go deeper into that because humans are humans. Humans will always find the quickest and easiest path to do something, and as a result of that, it could create risks for the user and also for the company. So I'm also an adjunct professor for cybersecurity at one of the most prestigious universities in APAC, and a lot of these master's students are senior business leaders in the community. And when I do the typical quizzes, I love kind of icebreaker questions to them, and I say to them, look, I put 2 passwords on the whiteboard and I say, which one's more secure? They would always say the one which is kind of all mixed up is secure, but it's very short. But then I put some really long one there, but it looks relatively more of a word, and they always say and always think that the complex one is always the most secure. And of course the length is generally the major factor with complexity on top of that. So I can see that there's still a lot of education that needs to be done at the senior level through to the juniors, through to everybody. And I mean, even in our industry, the education needs to extend even farther than the company. So in the fintech and crypto space, we've got SIM swapping attacks and all these things that generally would not be a major issue in the traditional industries. But in the crypto space, on the fintech space, people generally do that so that they can take over your app because everybody's using their phone to use your fintech and cryptocurrency apps. So these are the things that we need to educate the people. So on top of educating our staff, we actually also try to educate our end users as well. So we do everything from blog posts through to even launching a anti-phishing code in our emails to our customers. So if you know a certain number, like say for example maybe not 1234, but like a 4-string number that only you know, then when you get this email from our company, you'll know that it's a legitimate email and it's not a phishing email. So phishing is still the number one form of entry for malware, ransomware. It's just always going to be a major problem. So doing those phishing simulations is useful, but I think awareness and education, it needs to happen. One problem I'm seeing with education, again, going back to my comment before about tick box security, some of these 5-minute short modules that you may be seeing are just not really cutting it, to be honest. If you want to learn something, you got to really learn it. And unfortunately, if people don't put in the time and effort to learn the concepts, that becomes really challenging for the organization to kind of embed into the culture of a security culture.
Well, Jason, you are just a wealth of information, and listening to you, I'm thinking, wow, he's like the picture of a cutting edge CISO. Unfortunately, you're right. You're an anomaly. Most companies that we talk to, Fortune 500 companies with a lot of resources and deep pockets, they don't have teams devoted to training their employees. So thank you for sharing all of that with us today. And I hope you'll come back on again some point in 2022.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Pleasure to help. I love sharing, so no problem.
I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime Magazine. Joining us today was Jason Lau, Chief Information Security Officer at Crypto.com. With over 2,600 people in offices across the Americas, Europe, and Asia, Crypto.com is accelerating the world's transition to cryptocurrency. To learn more about Crypto.com, visit Crypto.com. This interview is sponsored by KnowBe4, the world's largest security awareness training and simulated phishing platform that helps you manage the ongoing problem of social engineering. To learn more about KnowBe4, visit KnowBe4.com. You can keep up with all of our media at cybercrimemagazine.com.